Oh, thanks everybody. And I do apologize again. Thank you for your patience. Um, so following on from last time, I'll continue the same pattern, which is to sort of direct this seminar with a series of questions, with the intention of it to be really an open conversation with the aim of understanding what a science of technology disruption might look like, what it might entail, and the sort of things we would need to know, those sort of things we would need to define, and the sort of criteria we would need to meet in order for a science of technology disruption to be meaningful and in any sort of clear intellectual sense, first of all, and then I suppose along with that a practical sense. So in the spirit of that, I've got a few questions that I'd like to organize this seminar around, and I felt like we moved a little slowly last time, maybe a bit more than I could chew for the time that we have, and so I've only got I've got a smaller set of questions tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to dig into them, and they can spill over into next time as well if that's necessary. But just as a reminder for what we were talking about last time, we were asking, if we have a science of technology disruption, and we're thinking about what that would entail, sort of two fundamental ingredients seem to be necessary, at least in my mind. On number one, on the one hand, we need some sort of theoretical basis, some sort of theory, some sort of theoretical framework, within which to seek good explanations for the phenomena that we're interested in. And then on the other hand, number two, we need some way to observe the phenomena. We need some body of evidence that we can point to, either retrospectively, and there's, I think, quite a large historical body of evidence that we can look to, and then in the present moment and looking out into the future, are there observations we can make now and predictions of future observations that we can make that will add to a preponderance of evidence. And with those two key pieces together, then I think we can start to, be standing on some relatively firm ground as far as the claim of this being a scientific endeavor. So that's a very high level picture of where I think we were coming from last time. We had some nuanced discussion about a lot of the details that are there. What I thought I would ask, following on from that today, to start with is what is technological improvement or advancement or progress? So last time we one of the things that we discussed was, okay, well, if we accept this definition that I've proposed of technology itself being a form of knowledge or know-how, a great question, and if you have to forgive me, I don't exactly recall who posed it, but somebody posed a great question, which is, how do we know what the difference is between an improvement versus just a change? Because not all changes are improvements. So if we're talking about a change in knowledge, or if we're talking about the usage, for example, of a set of practical knowledge, a set of know-how, a bunch of tools, or a one or more technologies, any one of these ways of looking at it will do. If we've got a suite of tools or technologies that we're using, and then we make a change to another set of technologies or suite of technologies or tools, how do we decide whether or not the change is an improvement? How do we know whether the new knowledge that has come into hand, if that is better in any meaningful way? And it was interesting. This is it's the kind of bedrock assumption that we need to be clear about, because it's easy to fail to make an explicit assumption and instead make an implicit assumption and not realize that you're doing so. And of course, that can be a real problem. So I thought that would be the first thing to kind of start thinking about here. So I've got a couple. Let me kick it off here with a few thoughts on that topic, and then let's just open it to discussion, to that first question to discussion. But let me put pose a few things here. And I don't know if it's even worth me putting on the board. Maybe it is worth me putting on the board. So I'll write them on here real quickly, just so they're up there. So these are just some relatively straightforward ideas of mine. But the first is something to do with speed, scale, and precision. Sorry for the handwriting. My stylus is not working. I don't know why. Also, I'm stuck with my fingertips, so it's a little clumsy. I apologize. So something to do with knowledge allowing us to transform the world around us, with speed, scale, and precision being meaningful metrics. Something I think that's relevant. That if we look at technological advancement over the long arc of human history, we can immediately look to these kind of measures as guiding us to what is a better or a more powerful technology compared to a worse or a more primitive or a less powerful technology. It's something to do with the speed and the scale and the precision with which we can manipulate the world around us. And by the world around us, I basically mean matter, energy, and information. And if anybody else has a better suggestion for sort of the basic constituents of the physical world, or if I've missed something, let me know. But those seem pretty fundamental to me: matter, energy, information, manipulating them with and measuring or evaluating those manipulations in terms of speed, scale, and precision, and that as a result of those manipulations, executing transformations of reality from one state to another state. And so that's sort of the first set. The second thing to think about is are these transformations desirable? This is I don't know how to make this objective. So we may simply have to grant that human beings get to decide what is desirable. That may be something that isn't worth our time getting bogged down and into the weeds about. But it's certainly it's something that came up last time, and it's definitely a valid thing to think about, a valid thing to ask, right? Are the changes that we're talking about, they desirable? Whether or not we can execute them, and to what's, with what scale and speed and precision and so forth, are the changes that we're making, transformations of reality that we're making, are they desirable? And are they entirely desirable? Do they have, I think that there's room for debate. They may be desirable from one perspective, but not from another. They may be desirable for one moral agent, so one person or one group of people, for example, but not another. And there may be, of course, I think a key element that's connected to this, whether or not we achieve what we want, and then also have unintended additional consequences or side effects from the use of technology that we don't want. And of course, this is herein lies a lot of the basis of my own personal professional work, which is around environmental issues. So technology is, of course, reasonably, I think, blamed for a lot of environmental harm, but most of that harm is not intentional. It is unintended consequences of achieving other goals. If we could avoid those unintended consequences, almost all of us would opt to do so. There are very few genuine monsters and horrible folks among us, at least in my experience. So there's something significant in this desirability element, and that connects to a couple of other ideas here, I think, quite directly, and those are the idea of a toll. And I'm going to use this sort of loosely synonymously anyway, with some sort of concept of efficiency. Maybe effectiveness is better. And then along with that, some sort of idea of error. So here's how I think of the toll that technology takes. I think that this is in a lot of the existing discourse that I see around technology, I see the word cost used over and over and over again. The use of technology has a cost, and sometimes that cost can be externalized. This is an economics concept of the costs that are not internal to the transaction between or the exchange between two parties, but are instead imposed upon other parties external to that transaction. So there could be environmental costs or social costs that are not included in the pricing of a formal transaction between two parties or more, two or more parties. And I think cost is not sufficient. I think it's too limiting. So instead, I prefer to use the idea of toll because it encompasses other important concepts like opportunities that are sacrificed. So when you pick one transformation, maybe that's precluding lots of other things that you could have used that time and energy and effort for. And those are all some sort of, maybe they're an opportunity cost, but they're certainly an opportunity that has been foregone. It also includes other important concepts like the value of time. Is something important now versus in the future? And which is more important, the present or the future? Economics has a lot to say about these sorts of things, but I don't think it has the final word necessarily. So you may be familiar with ideas like net present value or discount rates. Some of this is captured in those ideas, but I want to have an expansive, very expansive idea, or very expansive concept in total here for what we really mean with technology and its performance. So efficiency's got to be part of this, or effectiveness. Like, are you achieving what you want to achieve? And what are the impacts or the consequences along the way that are unintended? And these can be, again, time is important here, is relevant here. Consequences in the present moment, and then consequences that may be deferred. They may not occur until much later. And of course, again, the environment is something that's informing a lot of my thinking here. So a lot of our unintended consequences of utilizing technologies don't become manifest immediately. There's a long time lag. There's a delay between when we incur damage to the environment and when that damage manifests itself very clearly. And then the final thing is there's something about error. Dan and I had a conversation that this really struck me. The idea that maybe there are other scientific disciplines that look at the effectiveness of processes and how much error is entailed in those processes, and maybe that could inform our thinking about how effective is a technology, how effective is a tool, how well does it work, and what would a better tool look like, and what would we want to be measuring, what would we want to be trying to identify as the metrics for how well a tool works. So that's my sort of broad picture of my thinking on this general question. But I think we do need to try to get a little bit of a handle on this before we can take too much further of a dive into saying we have saying we're trying to scientifically evaluate this phenomenon. We have to do a pretty good job of defining what the phenomenon is. And if we're talking about technology and technology progress, well, let's see if we can define that with some clarity. And I guess before I open this whole issue up to conversation, let me say one more thing, which is in my own experience, this is not done in most of the literature that I've seen, certainly the non-academic literature around technology forecasting, analysis of trends in technological improvement. All of this stuff is implicit. I never see any of this stuff explicitly discussed, or let alone some serious, rigorous attempt made to define these things. So all of this again is to say that I don't think we have anything that we could call a science of this stuff yet. And it seems like to me like at least part of that is because nobody has bothered to do this work, to get to the bottom of these things, or at least in any serious way. So let's start there and maybe have a bit of an open discussion about what technological advancement or progress would actually look like. What is it? What are we actually talking about? Any thoughts or questions?
I'm just sort of thinking. I haven't fully thought this through yet, but I wanted to voice it. So we're talking about um, technological improvement versus technological change. Um, I'm wondering if, like, could there be, maybe this is a contradiction? Could there be a disruption that was not an improvement, um, or maybe that just means we're like measuring the wrong thing or something like that. Like a metric of improvement is wrong. Um, yeah, I just worried, if you define it as improvement and you have your metric of what it means to be better, then you might miss some possibilities, um, because uh, they could they could be improvements under a different metric, or they could be actually not an improvement, just a maybe something becomes worse, but nevertheless there's a change.
Yeah, I think that's a superb point, and I'm trying to think of, and again, the it would be great to be able to point to examples where a technology came along that was that there was some consensus, some social consensus around it being a bad thing.
Mm.
And we can maybe think of a few of examples like that, where a technology has multiple dimensions along which we might evaluate it, and clearly along some of those dimensions, it's not an improvement. So one thing that leaps to mind is the technology of weaponry. So we have made obviously some pretty stunning advances in the last 150 years, certainly since the Industrial Revolution, in terms of our ability to cause destruction, and nuclear weapons being perhaps the well, certainly one uh, dark example of that. I suppose chemical weapons, biological weapons, all of those are pretty darn terrifying. And on one narrow metric, like as a weapon, nuclear weapons are, they're vastly more destructive. So on one metric, they are a far more advanced technology than a spear. But in many metrics, they are certainly not an improvement. They're not. They're not. So I guess it would depend on there must be some pairing of the technology, of the performance of the technology with the intended outcomes of its use. And that's where we get in, I guess, to this. I put this idea of what is desirable. Um, that's where I guess we have to think about who is looking at the use of the technology and the changes that it can that it can impose upon reality, and whether or not those are desirable. I suppose so. Somebody who might, you know, probably many of us would say, well, it's we don't ever want to use nuclear weapons. That any change in from of the world, one state to another, that's caused by that technology is not a desirable transformation. And yet, maybe there are some individuals, or some small small number of groups, whom under some circumstances that would be a desirable change. And
Can I
sort of a
can I query
thinking like that.
why this term desirable even belongs on the board? I mean, I could imagine a world, a configuration of the world in which any given technology could be desirable or undesirable. I mean, many people would argue population should be much lower, and therefore, like fixing nitrogen technologies are undesirable. Uh,
Mm.
so, why is that even really a valid part of a theory of disruption?
I think that I can offer a defense of that. I was trying to think, well, maybe you should just go with change and not have this direction to it. But you know, when it comes to predicting the behavior of humans, um, which is part of, is going to be like a necessary part, it seems, of a science of disruption, um, as it is to any like economic activity. Um, it seems like you should treat the humans as agents, or like that's one way of approaching the problem of predicting behavior is to treat humans as agents with goals or values. So, you could say, well, any change is possible, but that might not give you a lot of predictive power. Whereas if you start sort of modeling the desires of humans, then you might be able to make some predictions based on that.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. That's what I sort of had in mind. But then that's a very different kind of question to the one that is, are nuclear weapons desirable or not?
Well, I think nuclear weapons, I'm not an expert on this, but it seems like they're not desirable because of the states of the world that they bring about through their use, but through their presence and through not using them because of the mutually assured destruction kind of they're as a deterrent. Maybe this is too simplified, but you could say if nuclear weapons weren't desirable in that kind of sense, or at least in some sense, then they wouldn't actually exist because people wouldn't have invested the money in them. So they must be doing something, otherwise we wouldn't be spending, we as in globally, so much money on their development and maintenance and so on.
Yeah, but it seems out of scope to me. So you could definitely make an argument for a science of disruption treating the adoption of nuclear energy within the context of an economy or a worldwide system. But I mean, there's no way that you could incorporate the dynamics of geopolitics and mutually assured destruction into a scientific model of technology adoption, nor does it seem really. That's not the kind of thing that scientific theories aim to treat, at least not ones that are kind of fundamental. So it seems to me it's not too worth getting bogged down in this word, right? I mean, in the sense that there are many interesting disruptions that can be treated even without having much of a value-laden set of terms.
Maybe. I agree that it's not worth getting bogged down in the example of nuclear weapons, but I think it would be nice if we could treat that kind of thing as a technology disruption, potentially, in weaponry, that is.
It strikes me as on the one hand, we're unlikely to be able to make a strong case that technology is value neutral, could be value neutral, even in principle, let alone in practice. I think we can. The distance that one has to travel. It's really just a hop, skip, and a jump, right? From the rather arbitrary goals of the users of a technology, for which nuclear power is one example, to the metrics by which that technology is evaluated, and although values seem like something that probably we can't escape. We have to have some sort of bounding or simplifying conditions or set of assumptions about conditions that allow us to move forward. Because these same problems plague all of the scientific disciplines ultimately, right? It's very difficult to get away from these. I mean, even in things like medicine, you can get bogged down in the philosophy of how do you define what is and isn't an improvement in health, for example.
Yeah.
And so on, at some very basic bedrock level, it's extremely difficult to define that. And we have to sort of, I think, maybe just admit that these are ultimately value-laden terms that we're using. But I don't think that should stop us from making the attempt to have measures and and metrics and definitions that offer some way to operationalize this idea of a movement in a direction, right? So we don't want to get paralyzed by this. The question is, what simplifying assumptions can we make that allow us to move forward, not get bogged down, but that are not going to turn around and torpedo this whole enterprise because there was some fatal flaw that we didn't think about at the beginning.
I think I'm considering maybe this desirability thing actually maybe comes in later as like an instrumental thing, like it's part of one of the models that you might have, because it seems like maybe more fundamentally, disruption is about behavior of markets, or the humans that comprise them, and models of behavior is where you bring in desirability, because people are going to make choices of what technology to use, and things like that. And you can bring in desirability there. And there are long-standing arguments about what models you should have. Whether humans are perfectly rational expectation value maximizers or something else. That being a particularly I think problematic model. But it's like a basic one that you could start with. But anyway, maybe I guess the point that I'm trying to make is maybe this is not a fundamental thing, or there's like philosophical questions about like the role of technology in the world, but I think maybe what you start with is something like just choice. People are going to choose technologies based on something. You have like a model of their decision making or something like that, and that desirability as a concept could come into that model.
Definitely see that making some sense for sure. I can also see where aggregated preferences, the sum of choices that groups or populations of people make, manifest at a different level of analysis, and then perhaps there might have spoken out of turn earlier when I said maybe cost isn't the right way to look at it, but if prices and markets, price is not the same as cost, but if aggregated preferences are expressed in terms of prices that markets hash out, and maybe that is an example of how the analysis can allow the details and the subtleties behind all of those preferences, all of that, to wash that out as if it were noise, even though it isn't necessarily noise, but to wash it out as if it were noise for the purposes of an analysis at that aggregate level.
Yeah,
maybe we can do that same thing with the aggregate preference to adopt a technology, and then we can maybe identify traits or characteristics that technologies tend to have had over the course of human history. And I would argue that they will tend to, perhaps there was some interesting exceptions, but they will tend to have characteristics that align fairly closely with some of the criteria that I already put up there. How fast do they work? At what scale do they work? How precise are they? And to what extent do they have unintended or consequences, or do they, in other words, to what extent do they incur error in their process, compared to whatever the alleged or genuine goals are of the users of those technologies.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
I think that makes sense. So I was kind of thinking of this as maybe something that you're suggesting is fundamental, but I much prefer when you explain it as the fundamental thing is, the people are making these choices or whatever, and we're going to maybe hypothesize certain properties that popular disruptive technologies might have.
That's a great insight. I think that's really powerful. That maybe we were maybe trying to make it too fundamental in any physical sense is actually putting the cart before the horse. That's a fascinating way to think about it. Yeah.
And then I think have you considered? So you mentioned economics in terms of like cost, and I know economists think of these things, like you said, like discounting future returns and opportunity cost and this kind of thing. So I think it's possible within economics to have quite a broad conception of cost, but I'm also happy to call that a toll. So if you have you considered using kind of the fundamentals of economics, which is the study of sort of decision making across humans, have you considered using that as like the framework within which to build this disruption science on top of that? or do you really want to start sort of from scratch without economics?
I would say I'm not opposed to nesting this as a subdiscipline within economics, if that's indeed right fit. I think this kind of conversation is important to have if we're really at this fun moment, if we have this very fun opportunity to think, okay, is it worth creating this new subdiscipline, and if so, where should its academic home be? Where should its intellectual home be? And indeed, maybe it should be in economics. Maybe that is the right place and the right fundamental lens through which to view these things. And I think probably in general, that has been the predominant lens through which most folks have looked at this, through the lenses of business and economics primarily. But I certainly don't want to adopt that without seriously challenging that as an assumption to begin with, and coming to a conscious decision that is the right choice for an academic or intellectual home for this subdiscipline. If it is indeed, then that's great. But it does feel like there are things about this idea that economics fails to capture or somehow misses something important about. And again, these sort of the social impacts, the ecological impacts, the things. And I'm coming at this as an environmental scientist and indeed an environmentalist, in terms of my values. But when I see my fellow environmental scientists and activists and so on, I see them criticizing technology. It's precisely for the things that economics sort of takes a pass on, those externalities. And so anyway, I mean, so I was just wanted to make sure that we aren't making a mistake by assuming that is the right framing and the right language and the right set of preconceptions to bring to this. If it needs something more different.
I want to clarify. I think I completely agree with what you just said. So I want to clarify that I think what I would have meant by saying this is, you can use things from economics and maybe consider this to be a part of economics. I think I mean economics, like as in the ideals of the field, like what the field should be, rather than possibly what the field is. So, maybe the criticisms of what modern economics, the models that people use and that maybe don't align well with certain values that I also consider important, like environmentalism. I think you could think of that as like current economics or modern economics or something like that, and still want to be a part of economics, just a little bit different from that, or but I view the project of economics as something like the science of human, circularly, I would say, like economic decision making. But I think, we could hash out a definition, but that's probably out of scope for today. But it's about decision making. It's about choice, which disruption seems naturally to be like an aggregated version of that, a particularly fast-paced version of that. But then I'm not an economist. I also think there's lots of limitations in whatever the current models are, because I can see these like effects that are undesirable in the world.
Definitely. This is really helpful. Sorry, it's just the two of us are sort of dominating the conversation. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this or questions? Well, and again, this is just the beginning of what I hope will be a long and fruitful conversation about this topic, and hopefully longer next time, and I don't botch the whole daylight savings and time zone issue. So I apologize for that again, everybody. But I think we're just starting to scratch the surface here. There's lots more to think about and discuss. So this is great for today. We're still just starting. So Stay tuned and let's continue the conversation in the weeks ahead.